Arise, O compatriots, Nigeria's call, obey, to serve our fatherland with love and strength and faith. The
Independence Day, the 1st of October 1960, and Nigeria is now indeed an independent sovereign nation.
This was the first Prime Minister of Nigeria, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa's voice, making speech during the first Independence Day celebration on 1st October 1960 in Lagos. Nigeria got her independence from colonial masters on 1st October 1960. Nigeria became a nation after 3 protectorates were merged in 1914 and gave birth to the country called Nigeria we are celebrating today. The country covered more than 339,000 square miles. Nigeria is a country with diverse cultures, religions, and values, and it is classified as a giant of Africa in terms of natural resources and population, estimated about 250 million, making it the most populous black nation on earth. 62 years ago, there were celebrations across the length and breadth of Nigeria. In every nook and crannies of the new country, people were brimming with happiness at its prospect. Being born through the heavy birth pangs and the struggles of leaders of the time to give freedom to their people, the founding fathers, no doubt, had big dreams for the country.
No doubt, we in Nigeria are very anxious of fostering a good relationship with all the countries in Africa, and we hope that after October 1960, we shall go all out in order to make friends of our African neighbors. We are really interested in the other African states, but not in the sense of having a federated African states or a union of African states, because we feel, though the thing might come about sometime in the future, it is most important for our countries in Africa, especially those in West Africa, to do their utmost to develop the resources in their individual countries.
They were proud to be Nigerians and had great hopes for the future. Nigerians were once universally respected and even honored, being the most populous black nation and giant of Africa, filled with highly intelligent and hardworking people.
In 1960, Nigeria was a very nice place, a united country, people with high velocity of sense of development, cohesion, and unity. Interactions were very high. There was love, there was affection, there was industry, there was scholarship, there was interface. The people felt one, they interacted very well, and we were very happy children then. Nigerians were happy. Things were seen as gaining independence from colonial rule. The people had very high expectations of how their country will turn out to be. And government was formed, and there was very vigorous competition between the groups, positively. Every sector, every section of Nigeria tried very hard to impress upon the others that they are also important. They are also contributing to the development, growth, and greatness of Nigeria. And that was very healthy competition until politics failed us, and then we lapsed into some kind of agreement which led us to a civil war 7 years after independence.
What went wrong 62 years after independence? Some prominent Nigerians believe 62 years was a very long period. Nigeria is still crawling. The only thing worth celebrating is the fact that the country remains one indivisible entity despite 62 years of political struggles.
And then 62 years is a very huge and a very long period for those that are determined to achieve whatever they wanted to achieve. And then the country has a combination of blessings and curses. It has very fortunate and unfortunate incidences and coincidences throughout our political history. But it will reconcile down to the successful resolve of remaining as a single entity. That has been our single greatest achievement that I can talk about.
Although there are some improvement in certain areas, but Nigerians still have a long way to go in both political, social, and economic development. What Nigerians are lacking now is self-respect, while the authorities need stabilization for socio-economic development of the nation.
We can classify the period of independence into three. The first set of countries like Egypt, Ethiopia, Liberia got their independence. I think there are about 13 of them before 1960. About 13 countries. Now if you look at those countries like Egypt, like Ethiopia and so on, you can say they are more developed politically, they are more stable politically. Then the second set, there are about 17. They're made of, including Nigeria. You can put Ghana because Ghana was 57, Nigeria was 60. The difference isn't much. So this type, we can consider them in the second set. And the third set were those after 1960, and they're the majority, about 30, I think, 30 or 31. Out of the total 61 countries in Africa. Their level of development and stability is not the same. You know, if you look at Ethiopia, despite the recent happenings, and Egypt, they have more political stability. But that doesn't mean that they don't have this upheaval from time to time. So if you see 60 years is quite some time in a history, in a life history of individuals. But for a nation, we're still far, far away from reaching the time of maturity. Because you look at America, 200 years. You know, some other countries, you can't even count. They've been there for ages. So actually, we are still in the process. I think we're still in the process. But we need to do some institutional changes. If I say we, I mean the whole society. Not only government. The mistake we are making is we are leaving everything to government. Not way. It can't work that way. For example, if you look at our youth now, who's coming out of the university, you know, they still think they can come and line up and get jobs as we used to do. We didn't line up to get jobs. The jobs were just there. Now the jobs are not there. You just have to create it yourself. The opportunity is there. The opportunity is made up of needs and market. Literally everywhere you go, the market is there. There are things that need to be done. So our youth of today have to be more innovative and fend for themselves. And it's not them alone us and as parents have to be realistic, have to put them in line. And you know, there is an indirect link between unemployment and insecurity. A lot of this petty thefts and so on that is happening, including the major insurgency, have to do with joblessness. Anybody who is employed, who has something to do, who knows from morning to evening has something to do, hardly has time for violence or insurgent behavior. So it's a combination of what the government does, what the society does, and what you people do in the media, and trying to educate people that look, time for you to finish your degree and so on and sit down, or expect that you can get a job is over.
The Nigerians' 1999 transition from military to civilian or democratic government was a defining moment in the history of Nigeria, representing the beginning of the longest uninterrupted government since independence in 1960. Professor Ibrahim Umara of the Department of Political Science, University of Maiduguri said, Nigeria misses her road to economic and political development from the exit of colonial rulers as a result of our failure to adhere to the real democratic system that will match with the peculiarity of our country.
Democracy is a function of systemic interrelationship. You can't just mobilize people to vote for their leaders and then to beat your chest and say you are democratic. It's not sufficient. Democracy as a system of government connects the ruler relationship through representatives. And before the representatives in the system, you have gatekeepers. These gatekeepers represent people in three different layers. One within the ambit of a political party, a structure with a manifesto that bring together like minds associating with one another on how to passion out and cause the fate of development for the nation and how to handle plurality. And this is always represented by the membership of a given political parties, which in addition was used as a platform to creep into corridors of power. So now you can observe the institutional fallacy of political parties as to who controls them, with what manifesto do they exist, and what are the functions of political party. This is just only one aspect of what you call gatekeeper in a system. So beside the political parties, you also have interest groups. Nigeria is a federation made up of different interests represented by interest groups, and interest groups are also divided into vertical and horizontal. The vertical interest group are those that were always represented through the organized labor, such as the Nigerian Labour Congress, Nigerian Medical Association, National Association of Nigerian Students, Academic Staff Union of Universities, and so forth and so forth. Now these are vertical interest groups bent on promoting and protecting the interests of their members within the overall polity. Then you have ethno-religious and cultural associations and groups, which are also having a sort of vested interest that is highly conflictual. For example, the Christians were represented, the Christian churches, I can say, were represented by the Christian Association of Nigeria, and the Muslims groups and associations were represented by the Supreme Council of Islamic Affairs. So these are two powerful antagonistic groups that tend to stray and constrain what we call a collective national cohesion through political culture and socialization. Then you have ethno-regional, such as the Arewa Consultative Forum, such as the Afenefere, such as the OPC, such as the Niger Delta Movement. All these are interest groups that are highly sectional, creating a sort of sub-national loyalties that tend to challenge political stability of the country because it is not properly put in a proper perspective and shape. Then you also have pressure groups. These are also groups on their own, such as the media, that consistently remind people on the roles and expectations of the institutions that are already mentioned within the context of the gatekeepers. And they form public opinion. They inform the public about the activities of all this. And overall, what they form as an opinion will be considered by those in what you call the convergence circle. The convergence circles were represented by elected representatives such as the legislatures, such as the executive, flanked by the judiciary. So these three will sit down, decide, allocate resources, and it will come as what you call feedback within the context of the political system. So now democracy is a system that connects the rule relationship.
Professor Umara, however, said the confounding problems Nigeria is facing is a result of lack of patriotism from the political class and the political system which Nigeria operates led to the failure of socio-economic development of the country 62 years after independence.
Democracy as a system is not made for you. It was a system of governance that is peculiar to peculiar circumstances of certain countries. All the way around 1917, Lipset had made a hypothesis, and up to now students of political science, particularly those in electoral colleges, are investigating the hypothesis. She now Lipset categorizes the efficacy of democracy. And he said, for democracy to function, there are certain variables. And she identified these variables. Education is so sacrosanct for the functioning of democracy because according to them, education tends to empower people to understand, to homogenize the heterogeneity. Besides that, educated people have ingenuity of thinking to be industrious, and that will create what you call industrialization. Industrialization will create employment opportunities. Employment opportunities tend to generate resources and income. Income and resources tend to urbanize the population of the people. So when you have all these functions put together, that is why democracy will effectively function. And even within the context of the advanced world, she classified the democratic principles practiced in America much more different with that of Europe. Even from Europe, they now divided Europe between the Britain, Anglo-Saxon, the French and the Germans, and from there you can see the differences. So even among the Europeans, the nature of democracy being practiced is much more different at variance in relation to whether United States of America or Canada. And these are the so-called developed that consider democracy as part and parcel of what their cultural values and norms. And herein we are made up of too many pluralities, highly diverse. And the diversity is supposed to serve as a source of our strengths. But the politicians tend to capitalize on these diversities, either ethnic, regional, or religious, for them to mobilize along cleavages. Political opponents tend to also mobilize his or her people along the same line in order to compete with you. Unconsciously or consciously, these tend to create friction among the very citizenry along primordial inclination. And once the country is polarized along primordial tendencies, the tendencies of trust, of keeping together, will be lost. And once you have populations that are mutually suspicious of each other, you will hardly have a single way to chart for the mutual development of the country. So that is where the problem lies. You are talking about how far you have gone. The decisions that were taken by those in zone of convergence, the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary, that is going back to the environment as a feedback, is a function of what? Responsible and responsive leadership. Responsible but irresponsive leadership. Irresponsible but responsible leadership. Irresponsible and irresponsive leadership. So, which category are you now? Do you have responsible people that are not responding to the yearnings and aspirations of the citizenry? Do you have irresponsible but responsive people that are responding to the needs and aspirations of the citizenry? Will definitely determine your social, political, and economic situations in the country. So if we had the right institutions, right channels, we will not talk about individual as a centrality that will marshal out all the resources that we have in order to respond to our needs and aspirations. So democracy in essence is a system of political administration within which the institutions are strengthened for continuity, carrying along the masses alone. These masses in turn determine the outcome of policies. They will question through accountability and transparency what it should be, and that will determine the welfareistic nature of the citizenry.
Dr. Bulawa Guvio enumerated some of the reasons why past leaders like Sardauna of Sokoto, Tafawa Balewa, Nnamdi Azikiwe, among others, succeeded because they care only for their people's welfare and the unity of their country.
You see, in Nigeria, people who have the resources, who have the knowledge, the wherewithal, the know-how to harness Nigeria, their generations are extinct. Our forefathers, our founding fathers, always think of greater Nigeria. They always thought of how to develop the country. Me and you and our seniors were forced to go to school by our elders, by our leaders. They went to the extent of traveling to villages and cottages and hamlets on their horses and camels to ensure that they recruited us into primary school. They sacrificed their lives. They even fought our parents and relations with knives and spears to stop them from taking us to school. But they did the job. And that's why today I can speak this poor English to you. So our leaders of yesteryears were only concerned about their people, the welfare of their people, the development of their country. They were not corrupt. They were not thinking of themselves and their families only. They were thinking of all Nigerians, of all callings. They did not leave out anybody. In the northern Nigeria, the Sardauna, if you go and tell him that you are from Sokoto, you are from Borno, you are finished, you have failed your interview. Who are you? My name is Amarawa. Where do you come from? Arewa. Very good. Go in. If you start telling them that I am from this Kawi, I am from this, my religion, Islam, that is the failure of the interview. That was how the entire North were known as an Arewa. And then we forged ahead. We were very happy. Our commodities sold whole world. Our economy was very strong because everybody was working. There was no young man left alone to be begging on the streets. Even the Almajiris people are calling now, they never begged like that. There were time for them to go out, and when they go out, within an hour they get what to feed and come back home. So today, our leaders, our religious leaders, our political leaders, everybody is talking negative. Go to any church, go to any mosque, go to any public lecture. People are just being rhetorically, they will just say whatever they wanted to say without having any regard to who is listening. Our children, our young ones, our students, our brilliant young men who will take over from us are listening to us talking nonsense.
As the solution to the problems affecting the development of our country, Professor Omar said, unless our political leaders think outside the box and develop policies that will directly respond to the yearning and aspiration of Nigerians, we will remain static.
Those in the gatekeeping function, they are not properly responding to the responsibilities that are attributable to them. If you now take political parties as an institution that tend to breed, program, and train leaders, the political parties were not properly structured. the political parties have tilted, and the difference from one political party to another were often blurred. For example, the major political parties in the countries are PDP and APC. You can ask even the party chairman of these parties as to what is the manifesto of their own political parties. They can hardly tell you. So that will tell you the ferocity of the problem. That is number one. Number two, those electors that identify themselves as members of these political parties have done so not because of the manifesto, rather than because of the personalities that were inherent in these two political parties. And then number three, the mechanism in these political parties sometimes happen to usurp, the powers were usurped by the executives, because automatically the governors and the presidents tend to be the party leaders, and the parties don't control these chief executives anymore because they definitely rely on them for their resources for day-to-day running of these parties. So in such circumstances, what do you expect? It's not democracy, rather it's kleptocracy. So in normal democracies, political parties, as I said, association of like minds, these like minds will contribute. In their contribution, they will now identify the personalities which they think, once in place of authority, will tend to turn around what they were expecting for. But the cycle of money power conundrum in Nigeria, within which people tend to be in political power, creep into corridors of power, accumulate resources, use the resources to retain the cycle of that power, tend to inhibit mature development toward political dispensation in the democratic governance.
Commenting on the current political situation of the country, the professor and elder statesmen urge both the leaders and the led to work towards putting heads together to end the problem affecting the nation.
Nigeria is not as big as China. China succeeded through cultural revolution, and I think Nigerians, we have greater chances than the Chinese to have the cultural revolution, because average Nigerian, when you interview them, through their interaction, you will hear that they are proud of Nigeria, they like Nigeria, they don't want Nigeria to be dismembered. And God Almighty has given us everything that we need. So what we lack is those that will coordinate the human and material resources to take us to the destination. That is what we lack. And those people who are creating the conundrum of power, wealth relationship have to be sidelined. One, if they are not sidelined, they have to be checkmated. And they are checkmated through what you call policy dialogue, policy document, and a blueprint. It's very simple, but the politicians will not like that. I will turn around Nigeria in less than 6 months. But it's going to be very much difficult. It's going to be very tough. Very, very tough. If you take 1,000 Nigerians that have international connection, engaged in activities of anti-Nigeria, when you pick these people, the remaining Nigerians will become. America that you are talking about, the Britain that you are talking about, even Israel, they have special security squad. The CIA, for instance, in the United States of America, is established to identify anti-American elements outside America. Any personality, group, or entities that deem to challenge America in its way to progress will be eliminated and isolated. FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, is hunting Americans from within America, whether in the academia, whether in the legal, whether in the medical, whether in the business, whether in the political, wherever you may be. Once you are identified as an anti-American element, you will be eliminated and sidelined. Unless you have these two, you will never succeed. Two, the greatest problem from 1999 to date is to reduce the Nigerian military institution to be subordinate to democratic institution. It's very unfortunate development. The military is the institution, the guarantor and the custodian of the Nigerian state. The military is a neutral, apolitical entity. cherishing survival and integrity of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. The military outside will be observing the political immaturities of the politicians. If they tend to threaten national security, the military will now propel and creep into corridors of power by way of discipline, as they were doing. But throughout the collapse of the Soviet Union, the military were forced to go back to barrack and allow the politicians to do whatever stupidity they wanted to do. And look at the mess that we find ourselves in.
Let me just give example. The defense industry, Kaduna, was established along almost the same time with that of Pakistan. Now that of Pakistan is able to manufacture fighter jets, and we're still working on only furniture and uniform. You know that we don't have the capacity to do that. It is a structure that has not been made in such a way that that can be done. If it were given the independence, for example, it would have been somewhere near that. The same thing with so many other institutions. So there is too much governance, too much government in almost everything that we have here. That has to be reduced. The private sector has to improve. And I think there is every hope that the incoming government, whether it is APC or PDP, because the leaders of this are all business people, businessmen, I am hopeful that more free hand will be given for business operation. You cannot, it's like a horse that you have sent a horse, a racer. You can't send him at the same time continue to stop it from running. If you want it to run, give it the free hand to run, And I think this is what most of our industries are suffering from.
So I think in our own interest, we don't need to wait for the government to tell us what to do or what not to do. We are all sensible people. All Nigerians are endowed with intelligence, with bright brains, with love and affection for the country. Let us use these qualities and apply them in our situation in the country, and it will be better for that.
Nigeria, it's a blessed nation. It's enriched with a lot of things. But the only way we could enjoy Nigeria is when we become good citizens. How do we become good citizens? By becoming law-abiding, by being tolerant of each other, by using our diversity in a positive way, not in a way that destroys us, not using it as a difference to bring about destruction among us. We are all one. We are all one Nigeria, whether we like it or not. In as long as we don't bring in religious differences, ethnicity, we don't bring cultural differences, and when we see ourselves as one, we can achieve a lot, because it is a duty upon us to uphold the heritage of our forefathers. Our forefathers had worked so hard for Nigeria to become into being.